It looks like we are now live on Facebook, Janet. So I'll go ahead and let you take the wheel and take
Right.
over as the host tonight. Thank you so much.
Well, I am Janet Corum, and I am so excited tonight to talk with Hannah LaBrie, the Lexington City Council candidate, a Lexington City Council candidate for District 3. It's been a pleasure to get to speak with her over the last few weeks, and I hope that you get a better understanding for what she's all about. And Hannah, it's so good to see you tonight.
Janet, thank you so much for being willing to have this conversation with me on Facebook. And hello to everybody who's tuned in. I'm glad to be here, and I hope that people will share their questions if they have them. And Janet, I'm looking forward to hearing your questions.
Well, thank you. One of the things that I have thought about is, how long have you thought about running for District 3 or running for any office in any race?
Yes. Well, I was just thinking about this because I'm teaching a class at UK, and I was thinking about some of my first classes of students as a professor. And I want to say that I started thinking about it a couple of years ago, but I don't think that it fully solidified the idea of running for office. I taught a service learning course and civic engagement course for a program called the Singletary Scholars Program. And I had some community leaders on, all different types of community leaders, and some of them were public servants. And that's when I started talking to Jim Gray and to Deborah Hensley and to Jake Gibbs about this connection between community service and public service. And I'd spent a lot of time working with my students to get them invested in the Lexington community in a sustainable way, so that they could do service at least for the 4 years that they were at UK. But I had always thought of myself as someone who was behind the scenes as an educator. I've been on boards at the University of Kentucky and with the International Book Project and with Civic Lex, and I'd done my own service within the community and worked in the nonprofit sector, but I hadn't thought, okay, I'm going to run for office until I started talking to Jake Gibbs a little bit more about what a city council person does and what his role looked like for him on a daily level. And that's right when he was deciding whether or not he was going to run for another term or whether he was going to retire and what his plans were. And he was very encouraging, and I started having some more conversations with people in the community, and I thought, okay, maybe I can go for this. So I've always been interested in service and community engagement, but it hasn't always taken the form of, am I going to run for office?
Sure, that's a big step.
It is.
Run. Well, it seems to me from the three people you named that you first talked with about this, that you had some good mentors to discuss running and discuss politics. And I am sure that Jake was a big influence in your life. I know he was in a lot of people's lives.
He was. And I think that I didn't realize how big an influence immediately, but it was really rewarding to get to talk to Jake about his work. And something I've noticed in the best teachers is that they care about you as a person. Jake was a joy to speak with, just not simply about issues that were related to our city, but just in general. And I think that way of being present with people and listening and caring about them, no matter what their position, no matter how much money they make, no matter who they are, he had a curiosity that was really noticeable. And, you know, having that kind of energy, I think, is so important, especially when you're talking to young people and investing in them and showing that you believe they have potential. And I guess in this case, that's how I felt when I interacted with Jake. And for myself as a teacher, I often think how important it is to be really present with people in their period of becoming. I mean, becoming who you want to be, growing into your identity, having someone who invests in you and cares about you and your thoughts about the world can make a huge difference.
That's right. Well, I know that you have made a lot of difference in people's lives in your professional work. And from what I did not personally know Jake, but from what I know about his life, he was involved in caring for people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's the feeling that I get from you too. And just a personal interjection, I have necklace on that my father, the only time he ever gave me anything in particular, and it's from the book Jonathan Livingston Seagull, and it says, "You have the freedom to be yourself here and now." And that just, I didn't plan on saying that, but
I love that.
I keep this with me because it's what you have to, as a teacher, and I'm a teacher, you have to let your students know that you are listening and you are with them, and it's so important. So I appreciate what your feelings toward that so much. Do you, since I've interjected one of my favorite quotes, do you have a favorite quote or a favorite poem or anything that you carry with you a lot?
This is one of the toughest questions I've gotten in quite some time, Janet. I spend a lot of time when I'm reading, and this is, whether I'm reading a book or that's a novel or a book of essays or poetry or a magazine, I always have a pen or a highlighter with me. And maybe this is bad. I try to use a pencil in books. But in a magazine, I use a highlighter, and I spend a lot of time writing down lines that really strike me. But what I found is that I don't have a favorite quote, but I have many notebooks that have fragments of quotes and ideas that have struck me for some reason at the time. And so even though I don't have a favorite quote, I do look for quotes constantly, but I usually think about them as kind of interwoven into some writing that I would do in the future, or that this line would jog my memory and it would help me start another creative piece. So I have to let you down a little bit, and that I don't have a favorite quote per se, but I do spend a lot of time thinking about it, important lines. So
I believe in highlighting and underlining too. I'm bad about doing it in books as well with highlighters, but
yeah.
They're my own books that I do that with. Well, getting involved in politics at this time, with our country seeming to be so fractured and so divided politically,
Mm-hmm.
has that seemed sometime to be a daunting task to try to be a part of uniting our city, our county, our state, our country?
I think something that's really remarkable about our city council is that it's nonpartisan. And I view that as a very positive aspect of our local governance, because it makes it even more possible for us to view each other through the lens of humanity, and find a space for common values and build from there. I think that we are in the process right now as a nation to reevaluate structures that have been very uneven, and to change them in a sustainable way. And we have to build coalitions across difference, and figure out compromise and listen in order to understand, in order to act on our shared values, and to act on the correct side of history. And I think that that listening to understand, and then figuring out what do we have in common to build a world, and continue to build a world that we want to live within. And that takes some pointed conversations. So those are my thoughts. I think it's an important time to be a public servant. I think always, but especially now, we have to bridge some divides to make changes for people in our communities, and we have to find common ground in order to do so.
And what are some of the methods that you might be able to do that, to bring people together and as a council member, staying connected with the voters and your the people in your district and in the city?
Well, you mentioned Jake earlier, and I was taking a walk and thinking about the conversation that we might be having tonight, you and I, and something that I think is important, is moving through the city at a human pace. You know, what I found, I haven't been able to knock on doors and to canvas in a traditional way. But what I found is that walking around and biking around, I have met so many people that way, just being within the community. And I think some of what you're talking about is about being fully committed to the third district, being accessible, and being accountable and transparent.
Mm-hmm.
And also something that I alluded to earlier, you know, figuring out who hasn't been included in the conversation. When I was a renter for many years, and this is just one small example, you know, I didn't know that that changes didn't just happen around me, and that I had a council person that I could call.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that being approachable and trying to figure out, how do we get people who have felt disenfranchised engaged? How do we get people who feel like they haven't had as much access to our systems of governance? How do we get them engaged? And I think that that means showing up. And it also means showing up in places where, you know, maybe a city council person isn't required to be at a certain event, but they need to be there. You know, something that you and I were talking about, Janet, when we first met, was this idea of attending local plays at high schools, right? Or going to arts events, or going to events not just when there is a plaque to be given out or some kind of special occasion, but going out of a curiosity for your community members and what their daily lives look like. And I think that takes time, and it takes relationship building and openness to do something different.
It does. And when you are out and about is when people, I think, open up more freely to you, and instead of feeling like really they're put on the spot or whatever, but that they're saying, hey, she's here, she's interested in what I'm interested in, and I'd like to bring this up
Yeah.
as far as something that I believe in or would like to see happen or so forth. So I think that's wonderful. And you are a woman of varied interests and talents. And so I think that would be, not only in the arts and in writing and with the Carnegie Center and your teaching and counseling and your love of the outdoors, I think that you have a huge opportunity to touch people and to listen to them as well, not only in the third district, but in everywhere around here. Is there anything, I like how you felt that you've had more time really to not going and campaigning, but just have free time to walk down the street and maybe nod to people and say hello and that kind of thing, of course, with a mask on. But is there anything that you really, really wish you could have done if we weren't in this COVID-19 situation?
Well, at the beginning of my campaign, so we're talking January, you know, early February, and toward the end of February as well. I think that if if I could have had some perspective about, oh my goodness, I have such a short period of time to meet with people in person. I mean, there are so many more people in our community who I would have set up meetings with and had conversations with in a more casual way. So I certainly wish that I would have had the knowledge to set up all of these in-person meetings, because when I have gotten the chance to talk to people in person, and I think that there are ways to approximate this over the phone or with Zoom, but it's so energizing to connect with people. And, I even at neighborhood association meetings, you're in a group of people, you're hearing people's thoughts, you get a sense of what's important to people in various contexts. And, I do wish that I would have had more of that. And I think that we're all learning how to adapt and change our ways of connecting. But I certainly have enjoyed getting to know members of our community, even if I haven't gotten to meet as many of them as I anticipated.
Right. Well, thinking about the recent Black Lives Matter campaign, or not campaign, but what all is going on in our country, finally having people recognize Black Lives Matter. How has that affected your thinking about being a council member or representing the 3rd District?
Well, right now, and I'm hoping that some people are tuned into this, some of our council members are meeting and are open to public comment about policing practices in our city. And this is the 2nd day that they're having that forum for public comment. So I do want to tell people that if they want to comment about public safety to our council, right now they have the ability to be watching that live, and then they have the ability to watch what some of their community members are talking about in terms of public safety and accountability and transparency and policy change. So it's just something I wanted to include for people. Mm-hmm. I certainly think that this is a time of reckoning in our country and a time for policy change, and that the treatment of Black people and people of color within our society is unacceptable and unjust. And people have been marginalized, and we continue to have disparities in our practices of policing and governance. And right now, we have an urgency and we have momentum with the protests that have been going on in our city and across our nation. And those protests have highlighted injustices that have been pervasive for a long time. And I think on an individual level, there are people who are reflecting on their roles in perpetuating systems of power and privilege, and at the same time, there are people who are insisting on systemic change. And I think, we have the ability to ask our local leaders to create change. To reform our police departments and our criminal justice systems, and to change the everyday practices that affect daily lives. And I think that what we're seeing right now are specific demands that are generating real action from elected officials. And
yes, I think so too, not just the opportunity, but we have the duty to do those things.
That's right. And I think that the urgency of this current moment is getting people, and we were talking about this in some way when you're talking about getting people engaged in the as a council member in the process of, what can you do? What can you do to change the city around you? I think people are saying, I elected these officials, and I want to speak out about what's important to us in our city and in our nation. And I think that our local officials have a certain amount of power, but they also have to work within the state to advocate for larger changes, you know, when we're talking about police contracts, for example. And I think that as local officials, we have elected representatives who can use their power on the local level to help advocate for change on a state level as well. And so I think who you elect matters, most certainly. For sure.
And well, and I mean, and also the fact that people in the LGBTQ community, even though, thank goodness, the Supreme Court gave a good announcement the other day, that still it's that same barrier, it's that same fight for equality. And we have to fight for those people who have not been able to be deemed as equal to the majority. And I hope that that would be something that you would be very interested in trying to make better.
Most certainly. And a lot of, you know, when we think about injustices, a lot of injustices are intersectional. You know, I mean, people, when we're talking about people who have felt marginalized or who have been discriminated against, I think that, yes, you're right. We have to have advocates in local government, and we also have to have more spaces and more openings to power. And there are various ways to create those avenues. But it takes advocacy and a willingness to put yourself out there as a person who says, this is important to me and I'm going to fight for it.
That's right.
And I certainly
takes
would.
Courage and grit and determination.
Yeah, and sometimes it can be unpopular, you know, depending on the timing of when that advocacy and when that fighting is occurring. You know, I mean, we've seen that in history. People who are willing to step out in front when it's very hard to do so, and that's important.
It is. Well, luckily I had parents who always stood behind me when I had beliefs of injustices happening to other people that maybe my friends' parents did not support my friends in the same thing. But I felt really lucky that I had parents who always supported me in those matters. Who, besides professionally in your life, do you feel was a really or were really important, formative people in your life that have made you the person you are?
Well, you brought up your parents, Janet, and I have to admit that my parents have been really important. I guess I don't usually say role models, but I think they have been role models to me in that in our family, and I grew up in a really rural area of Kentucky. I grew up in Mason County in a town called Mays Lick, and I grew up on a farm. Our house was a mile off the road, and it was outside of Mays Lick. So, it was, you know, long story short, I grew up in kind of an isolated area, and I had a lot of conversations with my parents as a result, and we talked a lot about our living out your values and what that looked like. And I remember at one point in my young life, you know, I think it was right when I was in college or something, I said, you know, I think I want to make a lot of money, or I think I said some passing comment like that. And my parents both said to me, you know, that's not what we raised you to do. You know, if you end up making a lot of money or being successful in a normative sense in a capitalist society in America, fine. But, you know, what's important is that you do good work and you do work in your community and you live out your values, whatever that looks like to you. And my mom is a ceramicist and my dad is a is a retired conservationist and soil scientist. So environmentalism and the arts were really important to us. And also taking care of our community and volunteering within it was too. And I think that service as part of your, just like what you do, was ingrained in me really early. And and when I went to college, you know, that continued, and then into Lexington as well. And I think, and it's something I talk to my students about, you know, depending on what's going on in your life, you have different resources, you know, time or money, or energy or opportunity, you know, to make a difference and to take your time for the benefit of your community. And but it does, and it just means you should adapt how you serve. And so, and it should be sustainable. And I think if you know what your values are and you know what's important to you, then it's not burdensome to show up for your community. In fact, it's a privilege, and you learn a lot in the process.
Right. And I love the fact that you said privilege. It is a privilege.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if more and more people would look at community service that way, that it is a privilege, we would have a lot of our problems solved. But I think that community service is obviously a passion of yours. What are some other passions of yours, whether it's in your professional life or your personal life?
I don't know if this is what I would call a passion of mine. So you did mention service. I love teaching, and I love working with young people at a big time of change in their life. So mm-hmm. that, you know, I've been an admissions counselor. I've taught creative writing to incarcerated women. I've taught creative writing to teenage girls. I've taught service-based courses to 18 and 19-year-olds. And there's something I really like about this time of becoming and discovering. It can be really uncomfortable when you're in it and you're like, oh, I'm questioning many parts of my life and I'm trying to articulate them differently. But I really love teaching, and the learning that has to occur for you as a teacher.
Right. That's one of the best parts about teaching, is that you learn so much.
That's right. And there's surprise that happens as a result. So I would say, you know, professionally, that's something I really like. And I enjoy making things. I like making like mixed media collages and mail art projects for people. And I love writing, doing creative writing, and that's taken different forms over time. But I think it's been challenging because during the course of this campaign, I've learned so much. I've had to use my mind differently. I've gotten to be curious about people differently and learn from them. But I haven't had as much time for creative writing. I've gotten to write for my campaign and to engage with people, but that's something I've missed. I also love riding my bicycle. I know that's not necessarily a passion, but it's something I really enjoy.
Well, I see it in your house.
Oh, yeah, it's right here.
So what's the longest bike ride you've taken?
Well, I'm embarrassed to say it's not that long. I think the longest bike ride I've taken is probably between 30 and 35 miles. And my partner and I biked out to an orchard, and there was this long gravel drive. It was a very long bike ride. It was hard, and he's a very long distance cyclist, so it was no problem for him. There's a long gravel driveway to get to the orchard itself, and I was so tired. You know, I felt like kind of a wimp. And he filled up his huge book bag full of apples, and he drug those all the way home. And I didn't carry anything, you know. So I did do that ride. And I would say, you know, on a weekly basis, just if I take a long ride, it's more like 15 or 20 miles. But I would say probably 30, 35 is the longest. But I use it mostly to get around town.
We're fortunate in this area to have so many great bike trails.
Yeah. Yeah,
and
the
places
legacy
to
trail.
ride. Although I say we, I am not a bicyclist, but I admire those who do get out there and exercise that way. Um, if you are elected council member for the third district, what would you, in just 3 or 4 sentences, like to achieve?
Well, it'll be interesting to see what the next couple of years bring for our city. I certainly want to make sure to protect the work that's already been done in the third and in our downtown in particular. You know, the vibrancy of downtown, the small businesses that we have. You know, we have so much more public art. I think we have some really, really good progress that's been made. And I want to build on that progress. And I also want to figure out how can we better serve all members of our community and increase their quality of life. And that might mean, you know, wraparound social services. That might mean affordable housing. But I certainly know that we have an opportunity to keep our downtown vibrant and to take care of what makes Lexington distinctive, you know, while looking toward our future. So yeah, I think that's more than 3 words. I probably said like 4 sentences.
Well, the thing is that Lexington does have so much to offer, and um, one of my main interests, of course, is the arts, and all of the theater companies and the theaters themselves that are in this area and downtown, and how sad it is that performers are not getting this live performing right now. They're getting a lot of experience in virtual performing, which has been very creative. But I really feel for the arts groups that are not, you know, including painting, the artists that have their gallery shows, that they're not getting to do that right now. And I hope that when things do open up, that there can be some kind of a celebration of the arts, because that is such a big part of Lexington, I think, more than a lot of cities this size in the country.
I agree with you.
Is there, let's see, I'm trying to think of some other things that you might like for me to ask, or that you would like to bring up. What do you think makes you more qualified than the other people running for council in third district? Think there are 4?
There are 4 people who are running, and I'm one of them. And I think that we're very fortunate in the third district to have a strong slate of candidates, and with a range of qualifications. And as you mentioned, Janet, I've worked in many different sectors. I'm a counselor and writer and educator. And what I can say is that I have strengths in working across dynamic and diverse groups of people, in navigating large bureaucracies, and in creating a combination of you know, creativity, collaboration, and pragmatic common sense. So I think that I've learned a lot, you know, with I did 3 terms of AmeriCorps, so I've done national service, I've worked in the nonprofit sector, I've been a writer for local businesses, I've gotten to work with students at UK, and I help people now figure out how do they balance their careers and what they want to do for a living, and their values and their interests in their communities. And I work with them in terms of leadership aptitude. And what I have learned is how to empower other people and how to get things done. And I've been fortunate to work with leaders in our community who have been quite good at both of those things. And I also think that my work as a counselor has allowed me to work on being very present and listening and being measured and making thoughtful decisions and advocating for people. Yeah, and I want to do this role on city council because I want to be fully committed to the 3rd district, and I want to put my values into practice. And I think it's very important to communicate your process. And I think that my background in writing and in communication and teaching communication can be really helpful when connecting with people. So those are some of my thoughts.
I would say that's right. You're a good organizer, you're a good leader, you're a good listener, you're a good communicator. You have compassion, you are creative. There are lots of adjectives that I can think of to describe you, and that I think are perfect for this job. And I feel like you would really be an advocate for people, not only in the 3rd district, but for the whole city, but especially in the 3rd district. Being a downtown area, it is a little unique from the suburbs, and it just seems like I can't think of a quality that you are lacking that would be really good for this job.
Janet.
Is there anything that you have ever thought of that you would like to go back and tell your younger self that you will learn this in the future?
I mentioned earlier in our conversation when I was talking about my family that I grew up in this in a rural area that on the one hand was so beautiful. It was really beautiful in terms of the scenery, and I grew up around a lot of people who are really different than me. And for a lot of my younger years, I felt kind of like an outcast. I was very involved in our community in some ways, but I always felt kind of different. And I think if I could go back and tell myself, something when I was quite young, I would say it's going to be fine. You're going to meet different people. You're going to find a community, and not to rush it. And I would say this to myself through college and into my early years when I first moved to Lexington, just not to rush it, because whatever you need to learn and whatever you need to figure out and who you need to become, it's going to happen. And even if you're in a period of uncertainty or growth or questioning, that's okay. That's okay to not have all the answers and to not know what's next. I would also say, and this is, I think this is, a little bit, I don't know, this isn't in the exact same vein, but I would tell myself to play as much soccer as possible and to run as much, because I sustained a pretty big bicycle accident about 10 years ago. On Euclid Avenue, and my foot got run over and I broke my leg. And so this is when I was about 24. And so I would tell myself in my teenage years and into my 20s to play soccer as much as possible, because when you have a foot injury and you're trying to play soccer, it's a little bit harder. So I would say live it up and join all those club soccer teams, and don't be nervous about not being as good as you want to be. Just enjoy the act of playing. I think that's the other thing, like You're not going to be perfect. Maybe if you take up a new sport or a new profession, you're not going to be perfect. But what you can do is work really hard and enjoy the process. And that's something I've thought about a lot in the past 5 months. And it's something that has been really, really good for me
Well,
throughout my career.
in your counseling, you have used maybe not those specific examples, but that philosophy with many of the people you have counseled or your students through the years.
That's right. That's right.
That's a great thing to go back and tell your young self and anybody's self. And even now, in my old age, that's still a good thing to think of is that, you know, don't fret about this. Just take your time. It'll show itself. You'll work it out. It'll be okay somehow.
That's right. That's right. Especially when you're in the middle of things, you know, it's good to remind yourself this is a process.
That's right. Well, is there something that you would like to leave this interview with the people who are watching to know about you, or anything else that you would like to mention or say?
Well, I do want to tell people, and I think this is important because we've talked quite a bit about me as a person and some of my philosophies and values and whatnot. But I do want people to know that on my website, which is www.hannahforcouncil.com, on my platform page, you'll be able to find all of my candidate surveys and my interview with Radio Lex and other issue-based conversations. And I think that I want to share with people the fact that, you know, what I can tell you is that I think it's really important to do your research. I think that you want to be an informed voter and you want to know who you're casting a ballot for. And I have been working really hard since January in this primary campaign. And I want people to know that I will work really hard for them as their city council person. And I will be open to talking to anyone in Lexington and throughout the district and to hearing their perspective and understanding their experience within our city. And I'm curious about people and I'm willing to communicate with them and to talk to them, even when and especially when we're in a challenging time within our community, because that's what a good public servant does. And the other thing I want to say is that I have been incredibly grateful to my campaign team. I've had a fantastic team of people who I've worked with during this primary. And though I knew a couple of them ahead of time, a lot of us were strangers to each other. And it has meant so much to me to have their support and perspective and all the work that they've done alongside me during this primary campaign. And that goes for members of our community who have volunteered and people who have talked to me and shown up and shared their perspective on our city. And I've been very thankful for that. So I wanted to thank my team too.
Takes a village for a lot of things, doesn't it?
That's right.
Especially a campaign. And for people who are watching, remember that the voting day, election day is just around the corner. It's June 23rd. So just 6 days away. So remember Hannah for council. It's free. Well, thank you so much for letting me get to know you better and share your thoughts and your personality and your talents with an audience on Facebook. I really have enjoyed this conversation and meeting you through the last few weeks.
Janet, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for the conversation and for your time. And thank you to everybody who is watching. I'm appreciative, and I hope that I can earn your vote. So thanks.